Today's topic is making of the constitution. First topic is demand for a constituent assembly. It was in 1934 that the idea of a constituent assembly for India was put forward by M. Roy, and in 1935 Indian National Congress for the first time officially demanded for a constituent assembly to frame the constitution of India. In 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru on behalf of Indian National Congress declared that the constitution of free India must be framed without any outside interference. That's only by the Constituent Assembly elected on the basis of adult franchise. Composition of the Constituent Assembly. It was constituted in November 1946 under the scheme formulated by Cabinet Mission Plan. The features of the scheme were the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was to be 389. Of these, 296 seats to British India and 93 seats to princely states. Each province and princely states were to be allotted seats in the proportion of their respective population. Roughly one seat was to be allotted for every million population. Seats allocated to each British province were to be divided among the three principal communities, that's Muslims, Sikhs and General, in proportion to their population. The representatives of each community were to be elected by members of that community in provincial legislative assembly, and voting was to be by the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. The representatives of the princely states were to be nominated by the heads of the princely state. From this, it's clear that the Constituent Assembly was to be a partly elected and a partly nominated one. The members were to be indirectly elected by the members of the provincial assemblies. Then they were elected on a limited franchise. And the election to the British Indian provinces were held in July-August 1946. International Congress won by 208 votes and the Muslims by 73, and independent groups got 15 seats. 93 seats allotted to the princely states were not filled as they decided to stay away from the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly was not directly elected by the people of India on the basis of adult franchise. The assembly comprised the representatives of all the sections of Indian society, that is Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs, Parsis, Anglo-Indian, Indian Christian, SC, ST, including women of all these sections. The assembly included all important personalities of India at that time, with the exception of Mahatma Gandhi. Working of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly held its first meeting on December 9, 1946. The Muslim League boycotted the meeting because they insisted on separate state of Pakistan. The meeting was thus attended by only 211 members. Dr. Sachidanda Sinha was the temporary president of that assembly. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the president of the assembly. Similarly, both H.C. Mukherjee and V.T. Krishnamacharya were elected as the vice presidents of the assembly. Changes by the Independence Act. The representatives of the princely states who had stayed away from the Constituent Assembly gradually joined it. On April 28, 1947, representatives of six states were part of the assembly. After the acceptance of Mountbatten Plan for the partition of the country, the representatives of most of the princely states took their seats in the assembly. Also, the Muslim League from the Indian Dominion also entered the assembly. Indian Independence Act of 1947 made three changes in the position of the assembly. First one is the assembly was made fully sovereign body which could frame any constitution it pleased. The act empowered the assembly to abrogate or alter any law made by the British Parliament. Second one is the assembly also became a legislative body. It has two separate functions. First one is the making of the constitution for free India, and the second one is enacting of the ordinary laws for the country. These two tasks were to be performed on separate days. Thus, the assembly became the first parliament of free India. Whenever the assembly met as the constituent body, it was chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and when it met by a legislative body, it was chaired by G.V. Maulankar. These two functions continued till November 26, 1949, when the task of making the constitution was over. The third one is the Muslim League members withdrew from the Constituent Assembly for India. Consequently, the total strength of the assembly became 299 against the 389 originally fixed in 1946 under the Cabinet Mission Plan. The strength of the Indian provinces was reduced from 296 to 229 and those of the princely states from 93 to 70. In addition to making of the constitution and enacting of the ordinary laws, the Constituent Assembly also performed other functions also. First one is it ratified the India's membership on the Commonwealth in May 1949 and it adopted a national flag on July 22, 1947 and adopted national anthem and a national song on January 24, 1950 and elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the first president of India on January 24, 1950. On January 24, 1950, the Constituent Assembly held its final section. It, however, did not end and continued as the Provisional Parliament of India from January 26, 1950 till the formation of new Parliament after the first general election in 1951-52. Committees of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly appointed a number of committees to deal with the different tasks of constitution making. Out of these, 8 were major committees and others were minor committees. The major committees included Union Power Committee, Union Constitution Committee. Both were headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. And a Provincial Constitution Committee, it is headed by Sardar Patel. And a Drafting Committee by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minorities and Tribal and Excluded Areas, it's headed by Sardar Patel. Under this committee, 5 subcategories are there. And the sixth one is the Rules of Procedure Committee. It was headed by Dr. Rajendra Prasad and the States Committee by Jawaharlal Nehru again and the Steering Committee by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Minor committees included the Finance and Staff Committee, Credentials Committee, House Committee, Order of Business Committee, Ad hoc Committee on the National Flag, Committee on the Functions of the Constituent Assembly, Ad hoc Committee on the Supreme Court, the Committee on Chief Commissioners Provinces, Expert Committee on the Financial Provisions of the Union Constitution, Linguistic Provinces Commission and Special Committee to examine the draft constitution, Press Gallery Committee and the last one is the Ad hoc Committee on Citizenship. Drafting Committee. Among all the committees of the Constituent Assembly, the most important committee was the Drafting Committee. It is this committee that was entrusted with the task of preparing draft of new constitution. It consists of 7 members. Chairman was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the other members were Gopalaswamy Iyengar, Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, K. Munshi, Said Muhammad Sadullah, Madhav Rao and Krishnamachari.